There is a belief many of us inherit before we are old enough to question it, that family can do no wrong, that blood is stronger than pain, and that love demands endless endurance. We carry these ideas like treasured heirlooms, passing them from one generation to the next without stopping to ask whether they have become too heavy to bear. We are taught to forgive quickly, remain silent, and make room for behavior that slowly empties our spirit, simply because it comes from those who share our name. But what happens when the place that should have offered shelter becomes the place where your confidence is chipped away, one word at a time? What happens when affection arrives wrapped in control, criticism, guilt, or manipulation? The deepest wounds are often not left by strangers. They are left by familiar voices, the ones that know exactly where your heart is most vulnerable because they helped shape it. Those wounds rarely bleed where others can see them. Instead, they settle quietly beneath the surface, influencing the way we trust, love, dream, and even the way we speak to ourselves. There comes a moment in every person's life when they must decide whether peace is worth protecting, even if doing so disappoints the people they love. That decision is never easy. It asks us to separate love from permission, compassion from surrender, and respect from fear. It reminds us that accepting harmful behavior does not preserve a family. It only preserves the harm. Today, we are going to explore 6 toxic things family members sometimes do, behaviors that are often dismissed, excused, or hidden behind phrases like, "That's just how they are." These are patterns that quietly steal joy, confidence, and freedom, and the first step toward breaking their power is learning to recognize them. Because love should help you grow, not teach you to disappear, and no relationship, no matter how close, how old, or how sacred, should require you to sacrifice your dignity in order to keep it alive. One of the most damaging beliefs people carry is the idea that love gives someone permission to hurt them. This belief often begins in childhood, when we are taught that family is everything, and that loyalty means accepting whatever comes our way. We hear phrases like, "They're your family," or "They only say these things because they love you." Over time, these words become deeply rooted in our thinking. Instead of recognizing harmful behavior for what it is, we begin to excuse it. We convince ourselves that criticism is concern, control is protection, and emotional manipulation is simply a different way of showing affection. Yet genuine love has never required pain as proof of its existence. Healthy love creates safety. It allows a person to grow without fear of constant judgment. It encourages mistakes, because mistakes become opportunities to learn rather than reasons for shame. When someone truly loves you, they may disagree with your choices or offer honest advice, but they do so in a way that preserves your dignity. They do not constantly remind you of your failures, make you feel worthless, or use guilt as a tool to keep you obedient. Love can be firm, but it is never cruel. It can correct without humiliating and guide without controlling. Unfortunately, toxic family dynamics often blur these distinctions. A parent may constantly compare one child to another, believing it will inspire success. A sibling may mock your dreams while claiming they are simply being realistic. A relative may invade your privacy, dictate your decisions, or dismiss your feelings, insisting that they know what is best for you. Because these actions come from family, they are often normalized. Instead of questioning the behavior, the person receiving it begins questioning themselves. They wonder if they are too sensitive, too emotional, or too demanding, when in reality, they are responding naturally to treatment that undermines their sense of worth. This confusion can last for years. People grow into adulthood believing that relationships are supposed to hurt, that being loved means tolerating disrespect, or that setting boundaries makes them selfish. They enter friendships and romantic relationships carrying the same expectations they learned at home. They become comfortable with emotional neglect because it feels familiar. They apologize for things that are not their fault. They silence their own needs to avoid conflict. The cycle continues, not because they are weak, but because harmful patterns often disguise themselves as normal when they are repeated often enough. Recognizing that love does not excuse harm is not an act of rebellion against your family. It is an act of honesty. It means understanding that good intentions do not erase painful consequences. A person may genuinely care about you and still behave in ways that damage your confidence, your peace of mind, or your emotional well-being. Acknowledging that reality does not require hatred or resentment. It simply requires clarity. You can appreciate the sacrifices someone has made while also refusing to accept behavior that diminishes your humanity. Many people fear that questioning toxic behavior means they no longer love their family. In truth, love and accountability can exist together. Holding someone responsible for the way they treat you is not an attack on the relationship. It is an invitation for it to become healthier. Relationships built on respect grow stronger through honesty, while relationships built on fear often demand silence. The courage to recognize the difference is one of the first steps toward emotional freedom, allowing you to understand that your value is not determined by how much mistreatment you are willing to endure, and that genuine love is measured not by how much pain you can survive, but by how much respect, kindness, and emotional safety you are given in return. Regardless of whose name you carry or where you come from, not every wound is created by a single dramatic event. Some of the deepest emotional scars are formed quietly through repeated moments of disrespect that seem too small to mention on their own. A sarcastic comment at the dinner table, a dismissive glance when you share your feelings, constant interruptions whenever you speak, or jokes made at your expense in front of others may appear insignificant in isolation. Yet when these experiences happen over and over again, they begin to shape the way you see yourself. What starts as a passing sting slowly becomes an inner voice that questions your worth, your ability, and even your right to be heard. One of the reasons repeated disrespect is so dangerous is because it rarely announces itself as abuse. It often hides behind humor, tradition, or personality. A family member may say, "I'm only joking," after making a hurtful remark, leaving you feeling guilty for being upset. Another might dismiss your concerns by saying, "You're too sensitive," shifting the focus away from their behavior and placing the responsibility on your reaction. Over time, these responses teach you to doubt your own emotions. Instead of asking whether the treatment is wrong, you begin wondering whether your feelings are the problem. This constant erosion of self-confidence can affect every area of life. A person who has been repeatedly belittled at home may hesitate to speak up in school, at work, or in social situations. They may avoid sharing ideas because they expect criticism before they even open their mouth. They may struggle to celebrate their achievements because they have grown accustomed to hearing that nothing they do is ever enough. The disrespect they experience within their family becomes the lens through which they interpret the world, making it difficult to recognize environments where they are genuinely valued and appreciated. Repeated disrespect also creates emotional exhaustion. Living in an atmosphere where you constantly anticipate criticism or rejection keeps your mind in a state of alertness. You may carefully choose your words, avoid certain topics, or change parts of your personality simply to prevent conflict. This is not peace, it is survival. It requires enormous emotional energy to monitor every conversation, every decision, and every expression in hopes of avoiding another painful interaction. Eventually, you may lose sight of who you truly are because so much of your life has been spent trying to become acceptable to someone who keeps moving the standard. Perhaps the most heartbreaking consequence is that repeated disrespect teaches people to settle for less than they deserved. When someone grows up believing that love always includes ridicule, criticism, or dismissal, they may unknowingly seek relationships that feel familiar rather than healthy. Respect begins to feel unusual, while mistreatment feels normal. This cycle can continue across friendships, workplaces, and romantic relationships unless it is consciously recognized and broken. Respect is not something that must be earned through perfection. Every person deserves to be spoken to with kindness, listened to with sincerity, and treated with basic human dignity. Families are meant to provide a foundation where individuals feel safe enough to grow, make mistakes, and express themselves without fear of humiliation. When that foundation is weakened by constant disrespect, the damage reaches far beyond childhood, influencing confidence, emotional health, and future relationships in ways that are often invisible to everyone except the person carrying the weight, quietly wondering why they never seem to feel enough, despite spending a lifetime trying to prove that they are worthy of the very respect that should have been given freely from the beginning. Few ideas are more deeply misunderstood than loyalty. Many people are raised to believe that loyalty means standing by family no matter what, remaining silent in the face of hurt, and sacrificing their own well-being to keep everyone else comfortable. From an early age, they are taught that saying no is disrespectful, that questioning unhealthy behavior is a sign of ingratitude, and that enduring emotional pain is simply part of being a devoted son, daughter, sibling, or relative. These lessons often become so deeply embedded that people begin confusing loyalty with self-sacrifice, believing that the more they suffer, the more faithful they are to those they love. True loyalty, however, should never require you to abandon yourself. It should not demand that you ignore your own emotions, silence your own voice, or accept treatment that slowly destroys your confidence. A healthy family relationship allows room for honesty, disagreement, and mutual respect. It recognizes that every individual has value beyond the role they play within the family. When loyalty becomes a one-sided obligation, where one person is expected to give endlessly while receiving little understanding or respect in return, it stops being loyalty and becomes self-betrayal. Self-betrayal often happens quietly. It begins with small compromises that seem harmless at first. You stay silent after an insulting comment because you want to avoid conflict. You cancel your own plans because someone else expects your time without asking. You apologize even when you have done nothing wrong because keeping the peace feels easier than defending yourself. You ignore your own exhaustion to meet everyone's expectations. These choices may appear insignificant on their own, but over time they create a life where your needs always come last. Eventually, you become so accustomed to putting yourself aside that you no longer recognize what you truly want or need. The tragedy of self-betrayal is that it rarely earns the appreciation people hope for. Many believe that if they keep giving, keep forgiving, and keep tolerating harmful behavior, they will eventually receive the love and acceptance they have been seeking. But unhealthy relationships often adjust to whatever you continue to allow. The more you ignore your own boundaries, the more others may come to expect that you will always do so. What began as an act of kindness slowly becomes an obligation, and your willingness to sacrifice yourself is no longer noticed because it has become the norm. Choosing yourself does not mean rejecting your family. It means recognizing that your emotional well-being matters too. It means understanding that you cannot build healthy relationships while constantly abandoning your own needs. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. A person who respects themselves is better equipped to show genuine compassion, patience, and love because they are giving from a place of wholeness rather than exhaustion. Boundaries do not weaken relationships built on respect. Instead, they create clarity, allowing everyone to understand what is acceptable and what is not. There may be moments when choosing self-respect disappoints people who have benefited from your silence. They may accuse you of changing, becoming distant, or forgetting where you came from. Such reactions can be painful, especially when they come from those you care about. Yet, growth often feels uncomfortable to those who preferred the older version of you, the one who never questioned unfair expectations. Remaining loyal to your values, your dignity and your emotional health is not an act of betrayal toward your family. It is a commitment to living with integrity, refusing to lose yourself in the endless pursuit of approval that was never meant to define your worth in the first place. Many of the behaviors we experience within our families did not begin with the people who raised us. They are often part of patterns that have been passed from one generation to the next, sometimes for decades. A parent who constantly criticizes may have grown up under the same harsh words. A grandparent who struggled to express affection may have never received it themselves. Emotional neglect, manipulation, controlling behavior, and unhealthy communication can become so common within a family that they begin to feel normal. People stop questioning these habits because they have always existed. They become traditions of pain disguised as traditions of family. Understanding where these behaviors come from does not mean excusing them. Instead, it gives us a clearer picture of why harmful cycles continue. People often repeat what they have experienced because it is the only way they know how to relate to others. Without reflection, they unconsciously pass their unresolved pain to the next generation. Hurt becomes inherited, not through genetics, but through daily interactions, repeated words, and learned behaviors. Children observe how conflict is handled, how love is expressed, and how respect is given or withheld. These lessons become the foundation upon which they build their own relationships later in life. Breaking a generational cycle begins with awareness. It requires the courage to recognize that something familiar is not necessarily healthy. This realization can be uncomfortable because it challenges long-held beliefs about family, tradition, and loyalty. It may force you to acknowledge painful truths about people you deeply love. Yet pretending that harmful behavior is acceptable simply because it has always existed only ensures that the pattern will continue. Real change starts the moment someone decides that the pain ends with them. Choosing healing over repetition is rarely easy. It demands patience, self-reflection, and the willingness to respond differently, even when old habits feel automatic. Instead of responding to anger with more anger, you learn to communicate calmly. Instead of using shame as motivation, you encourage growth with kindness and honesty. Instead of controlling others through guilt, you respect their independence and choices. These changes may seem small, but they create entirely new patterns that future generations can inherit. The greatest transformation often begins with ordinary decisions made consistently over time. Healing also requires giving yourself permission to feel emotions that may have been ignored for years. Many people raised in unhealthy environments learn to suppress sadness, fear, or disappointment because expressing these feelings was discouraged or mocked. Breaking the cycle means allowing yourself to acknowledge those emotions without judgment. It means understanding that healing is not about pretending the past never happened, but about refusing to let it dictate every future relationship. The experiences that shaped you may explain your struggles, but they do not have to determine your destiny. One of the most powerful ways to break generational cycles is through the example you set. Children, younger relatives, friends, and even other family members notice when someone treats people with patience instead of cruelty, listens instead of dismissing, and respects boundaries instead of violating them. Healthy behavior can be just as contagious as unhealthy behavior. One person's decision to choose compassion over control can inspire others to question patterns they once accepted without hesitation. Breaking a cycle is not about becoming perfect or pretending you will never make mistakes. Every family experiences conflict, disappointment, and misunderstanding. The difference lies in how those moments are handled. A person committed to healing accepts responsibility, apologizes when necessary, learns from their mistakes, and strives to do better rather than repeating the same harmful behaviors. In doing so, they create a legacy defined not by inherited pain, but by intentional growth, proving that while we cannot rewrite the chapters that came before us, We always have the power to write a different story for those who come after us without allowing yesterday's wounds to become tomorrow's inheritance. One of the greatest misunderstandings about boundaries is the belief that they are acts of rejection. Many people assume that setting limits means becoming cold, unloving, or disrespectful, especially when those boundaries involve family. As a result, they continue saying yes when they desperately want to say no. They allow repeated disrespect because they fear being labeled selfish or ungrateful. They remain available at the expense of their own emotional health because they have been taught that good family members never place limits on the people they loved. Yet boundaries are not walls built to keep love out. They are guidelines that protect love from being damaged by resentment, exhaustion, and repeated harm. Every healthy relationship depends on mutual respect. Respect means recognizing that each person has feelings, needs, and limits that deserve consideration. Without boundaries, relationships often become unbalanced. One person constantly gives while the other constantly takes. One person's opinions are always heard while another's are ignored. Over time, this imbalance creates frustration that silently grows beneath the surface. What began as kindness slowly turns into emotional fatigue because generosity without limits eventually becomes sacrifice without appreciation. Setting boundaries does not require anger or hostility. In fact, the strongest boundaries are often communicated with calm confidence rather than raised voices. You can respectfully decline a request that places too much pressure on you. You can choose not to participate in conversations filled with insults or unnecessary criticism. You can leave situations where your dignity is repeatedly ignored. These choices are not punishments directed at others. They are commitments you make to yourself, reminding both you and the people around you that respect is a basic requirement, not a reward that must be earned. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear disappointing those they love. That fear is understandable, especially in families where pleasing others has always been expected. However, disappointing someone by protecting your well-being is very different from intentionally hurting them. A boundary may create temporary discomfort, but it also creates honesty. It replaces silent resentment with clear communication. It gives relationships an opportunity to become healthier because expectations are no longer based on assumptions or emotional pressure. It is important to remember that not everyone will respond positively when you begin establishing healthier limits. People who have become comfortable benefiting from your constant availability or your inability to say no may resist the change. They may accuse you of becoming distant, disrespectful, or difficult. These reactions can make you question whether you are doing the right thing. Yet discomfort is often a natural response when long-standing patterns begin to change. Someone else's disappointment does not automatically mean your boundary is wrong. Sometimes it simply means they are adjusting to a version of you that values yourself as much as you value everyone else. At the same time, boundaries should never become excuses for cruelty or revenge. The goal is not to punish family members, embarrass them, or repay hurt with more hurt. Healthy boundaries are rooted in self-respect, not bitterness. They allow you to remain compassionate without becoming vulnerable to repeated mistreatment. They remind you that kindness and firmness can exist together, and that protecting your peace does not require abandoning your empathy. Learning to value yourself while still treating others with dignity is one of the most important forms of emotional maturity. It means recognizing that your needs matter, your voice deserves to be heard, and your emotional well-being is worthy of protection. When you establish boundaries with patience, honesty, and consistency, you are not weakening your relationships, but giving them the opportunity to be built on trust rather than fear, on respect rather than obligation, and on genuine care rather than the silent expectation that love should always require you to ignore the quiet truth of your own heart